Good afternoon all and welcome to another session of the NBCO 2021 training series of webinars. My name is Sabrina MacDonald and I'm a Senior Executive Engineer on the NBCO team. For those not familiar with the NBCO, we work with building control authorities, owners, designers and builders and suppliers of construction products in promoting our vision of compliance with building regulations. Stakeholders doing the right thing even when nobody is looking is really the end goal for the NBCO and the work that we do. So as I mentioned, the vision of the NBCO is to promote culture of compliance with the building regulations. And in an industry marked by rapid changes in technology and processes, this is a very challenging task. So we strive to promote compliance through 5 pillars. First pillar is compliance support. The second pillar being education and training. And what we're doing today falls under the education and training pillar. There's also a pillar for inspections. There's a pillar for IS BCMS, which includes the BCMS system found at localgov.ie. So as per SI 9 of 2014, it's stated as the preferred means of building control administration. And the 5th pillar is the market surveillance of construction products. So the market surveillance pillar is the most recent addition to the office, with the National Building Control Office the overseeing body with responsibility for market surveillance in relation to construction product regulations. The 2021 market surveillance campaign will focus on aggregates. What is the building control legislation framework? Really, the purpose of regulation in a civilized society is for the health and safety of the citizen and the protection of the environment. The legislative framework of the building control system is contained in statutes and documents. The Building Control Act 1990 is primarily an enabling measure, and all the regulations have been made under that. It contains substantive provisions which give building control authorities powers in relation to securing compliance with building regulations. The provisions are supplemented by 2 important control mechanisms provided for in the building control regulations. The technical requirements for design and construction of buildings are set out in the building regulations, and guidance on how these requirements can be met is provided in the technical guidance documents. The remaining set of regulations deal with ancillary matters such as fees and procedures on appeals. Section 3.5 of the Building Control Act and Article 8 of the Building Regulations are probably the most fundamental provisions in the entire statutory code. Regulations, essentially all buildings to which the regulations apply, must, on foot of these provisions, be designed and constructed in accordance with the building regulations, and follows that the primary responsibility for observing the requirement falls on the persons who actually design, construct, and the owners of the buildings also, who normally start the process. So that's a picture of the building control officers at a recent conference. So to promote compliance with building regulations, we at the NBCO work to support building control officers in the 31 local authorities who are continually inspecting for compliance with building regulations and building control regulations. So any inquiries about the process can be made to the relevant building control authority or ourselves at support@nbco.gov.ie or directly to the department at buildingstandards@housing.gov.ie. So in terms of questions and answers for today, we probably won't have time for a questions and answers session at the end, but if you do have a question, please use the Q&A function throughout the webinar and we will answer those and circulate via email to the attendees. And the Q&A will also be provided under the video recording of this session on our YouTube channel, the NBCO DCC YouTube channel. So this session is being recorded and the Q&As will be available under the recording and also be circulated separately. So just what we're going to cover today, I'm going to hand you over to Martin Moore, who is a chartered engineer and currently the Assistant Chief Fire Officer with Tipperary Fire and Rescue Service. Martin has a degree in architectural technology with 4 years experience in fire prevention and building control. So I'll hand you over to Martin. And just for note, the NBCO has started changes that are required to the BCMS under SI 229 of 2021. These are mainly form changes and role nomination changes. So we hope to have that in place, or we will have it in place for the July 1st deadline. So I'll hand you over to Martin now.
Perfect, thanks Sabrina. I'll just share my screen there when you're finished, Sabrina. Okay, so just for clarity now, I'm just going to perfect. Okay, so as Sabrina said, what we're going to talk about today is the fire safety certificate process, covering fire safety certificates, revised fire safety certificates, and regularization certificates as well. So just to kind of give you a quick overview there, we're going to look at when a fire safety certificate, a revised fire safety certificate, or a regularization certificate application is required. We're going to look at the process of submitting a fire safety certificate application. We're going to look at the information that should accompany any application for a fire safety certificate, revised fire safety certificate, or a Reg Cert. We're going to look at the assessment and granting process. We might look at conditions and how they're applied and how they're enforced and checked out. We will look at the refusal and appeals process as well, and we'll have a brief chat on offences and penalties as well with regards to the fire safety certificate process. So to start off, I suppose we'll start with the base level certificate, which is our fire safety certificate. Okay, so Section 6.1 of the Building Control Act 1990 as amended allowed for the creation of building control regulations, and then Section 6.2 of that act allowed for the building control regulations to make provision for submission of applications. So in this regard, it meant for certificates such as fire safety certificates, revised fire safety certificates, and regularization certificates. Okay, so just a handy note for anyone joining in here, just the Law Reform Commission have consolidated versions of the building control regulations and the Building Control Act, so it has all the amendments from throughout the year. So it's quite a handy point of reference as opposed to trying to find the individual SIs as you go. So to start off, we're going to look at, as I said, fire safety certificates. So these came into effect in 1992. And Article 11 of the Building Control Regulations kind of stipulates or lays out the requirement for when to apply for a fire safety certificate. Okay, so you'll see there with regards to our requirement for a fire safety certificate. So it's required for the construction of a new building. It's required for material alterations to day centres, to buildings containing flats, so an apartment block. It's required for material alterations for a hotel or a hostel or a guest building, for institutional buildings, places of assembly, or shopping centres. Now, if we're doing material alteration to a shop, office, or industrial building, we don't actually need a fire cert unless we're providing additional floor area within the actual building itself, such as maybe a mezzanine floor or something like that, or if the building is being subdivided into a number of units for separate occupancy. Okay, so your standard kind of refurb of a shop isn't going to actually require a fire safety certificate, as I said, unless you're providing additional floor area or subdividing it into separate units. We'll also need a fire safety certificate for material changes of use, and we'll also need it for any extension to a building that's greater than 25 square meters. So as I said there, with regards to the material alterations to day centres or hotels, hostels, and institutional buildings, places of assembly, if you refer to Article 5 of the Building Control Regulations, that will give you a definition of what is a day centre or what is an institutional building. So again, a good handy point of reference there. Now, there are exemptions from fire safety certificates. So single-story agricultural buildings do not require a fire safety certificate. And it's very important there to note the single-story element of that. So if it's two-story or multi-story, you could require a fire safety certificate. So talk to the Building Control Authority on that. Dwellings other than flats, so a house essentially doesn't require a fire safety certificate. A single-story domestic garage, and again, single-story domestic garage. Two-story domestic garage is a different case because it's not really classified as a domestic garage anymore. Or a single-story building ancillary to a dwelling. So for the single-story building ancillary to a dwelling, it has to kind of be used exclusively for recreational or storage purposes. Like keeping plants, birds, animals, domestic purposes, that kind of thing. It cannot be used for purposes of any trade or business or for human habitation. Otherwise, it's not considered a building ancillary to a dwelling or a domestic garage or anything like that. So it's something different. Works in connection with complying with a fire safety notice under Section 20 of the Fire Services Act do not require a fire safety certificate, and they're just dealt with the fire authority separately. Also, just under Article 6 of the Building Control Regulations, there are specific buildings that are actually exempt from the Building Control Regulations in general. So obviously you do not need a fire safety certificate for Garda stations, courthouses, barracks, and certain government buildings for security reasons. Important to note there up in the top right hand corner, I have it there. So if a building or if the works require a fire safety certificate, the works cannot commence without a granted fire safety certificate, okay, unless a 7-day notice has been submitted along with a valid application for a fire safety certificate. Moving on to the next type of application, which is a revised fire safety certificate. So Article 20B of the Building Control Regulations stipulates when a revised fire safety certificate is required. And it will tell you that if the original kind of fire safety certificate was submitted prior to the grant of final planning permission, and let's say planning ended up changing the design of the building, then a revised fire safety certificate should be submitted. Or if there's significant revision to the design of the building during the build process or anything like that. Now, there's no real standard definition for significant revision to design. So if you're concerned about any changes that could be proposed to the building, talk to the local building control authority or the fire officer in question. They've done the original fire safety certificate. They're the best person to advise you on whether any revisions would be considered a significant revision enough to trigger the requirement for a revised fire safety certificate. So just to note, I suppose we said there that the fire safety certificates came into effect in 1992. The revised fire safety certificate and the regularization certificates came in 2009. So if we refer to Article 20C of the Building Control Regulations, they will outline when a regularization certificate is required. So typically where works have commenced or they were completed without a fire safety certificate or the submission of a 7-day notice and a valid application for a fire safety certificate, then a regularization certificate should be submitted to the Building Control Authority. So as I said, yeah, they came into effect in 2009, and the idea is to regularize the works and ensure compliance is being achieved with Part B of the second schedule to the building regulations. So the process of submission. So come the 1st of July 2021, SI number 229 of 2021 has facilitated the submission of fire safety certificates, revised fire safety certificates, and regularization certificate applications through the BCMS system. So that, as I said, has come into operation in the 1st of July 2021, or they can be set out in the form for that purpose included in the 3rd schedule of the Building Control Regulations. So on the bottom left of the screen there, you just see a screenshot from the BCMS kind of showing the tab there. So under My Applications, you can apply for a new fire safety certificate, new revised fire safety certificate, or a new Reg Cert, and you can see a list of all the open applications that you have as well. On the right hand side there, you'll see the application form that's outlaid in the 3rd schedule of the Building Control Regulations. Now, the information that's required with any of the certificate applications. So the biggest thing I've always kind of found is a completed application form. So there's usually a section that's forgotten about, or a common one there you see there in the top right hand corner, the owner or the leaseholder is not appropriately identified. So you just have to delete that off. Now, luckily with the BCMS, when you outline who the owner or the leaseholder is on the BCMS, it will automatically cross out or delete the other element there that isn't applicable. So as I said, completed application form, we need plans, sections, and elevations. So we're at a point now in the design process that we've moved past planning drawings. We've moved past that kind of stuff. Like submitting planning drawings for a fire safety certificate is not adequate, and an application could be invalidated based on it not having detailed or sufficient information to allow us to make a decision on it. So we need a lot more detail at this stage. We're moving more towards the construction stage of the project. So with regards to the plan sections and elevations, we'll need a site location plan. So that should have the OS sheet number, and the license should be on it. We should have NOR points. It should be at maybe 1:1000 or 1:2500. And it should clearly identify all the elements such as buildings, roads, boundaries, any other kind of identifying features. Okay. The site layout plan. So we need basically a dimension site layout plan. Okay. A sufficiently detailed one as well. So similar to the site location plan, we should have NOR points. It should be at an appropriate scale. And just be cognizant, especially if it's a large development, we might ask for larger scale elements of the site layout plan just to facilitate our assessment of it. With regards to the site layout plan as well, what we should have is grid lines where applicable. We should have boundaries. We should have the distance, kind of other buildings and boundaries, things like that, with the roadways within the site boundary and their widths. So obviously we need to be able to determine whether we can get a fire appliance within and turn around and have adequate facilities for a fire appliance within the roadways on the site. We should be looking at the kind of location of gateways and other restrictions of width to fire appliance access. Something that's often forgot about is any kind of overhead obstructions. So obviously if there's height restrictions on site, that should be outlined within the site layout plan. So like we need 3.7 meters for a pump appliance, so we need 4 meters for a high reach platform. So if there's cables going overhead or there's any sort of obstruction whatsoever, whether it be signage or anything, that needs to be highlighted on the site layout plan. Access points to the building should be located there. We should have like the location of any water main or a ring main and hydrants, along with dimensions on the hydrants. So like the hydrant should be dimensioned from any buildings on the site, and it should also be dimensioned from any hard standing areas where we could park an appliance or pull up an appliance. And the last thing really on the site layout plan would probably be like the location of any firefighting switches. So if you had like a firefighting switch to knock off a generator or a PV installation or something like that, that should be highlighted on the site layout plan to us. And then kind of any other kind of pertinent information. So detailed floor plans, again, we want to see detail. Simple kind of layout, general arrangement drawings aren't going to be enough for us to make a decent assessment of the project to see how it complies with Part B of the building regulations. So on floor plans, again, we should have NOR points, grid lines if it's applicable. The principal dimensions should be on the plan, and we should have travel distances outlined as well. Kind of any periods of fire resistance. So if we have elements of structure, any compartment walls or protected corridors or anything that's going to be fire resisting, including fire doors, fire resistant glazing, that should all be highlighted on the drawing, and we should have a fire rating on it, whether it be through a key or something like that. Ideally, what we should have is the intended use of each room. So sometimes with the likes of industrial buildings or pharmaceutical buildings, there tends to be kind of an abbreviation used for the actual use of the room. So we don't know what it is. So it's very important, if it's not highlighted on the drawing, that you clarify in the compliance report that WWP means whatever, or the abbreviation is clarified for us. We'd also ideally like to see the maximum occupancy of each room as well. It's quite handy from an assessment point of view to see how many people is proposed to be located within each room of the premises. We're looking at the fire escape routes and widths, so very important to provide widths on all the escape routes and the escape doors. Something that can be quite handy, and it's often missed, is if you have any cavity barriers or anything like that proposed, show them on the drawing. So whether it be a dotted line for a ceiling cavity barrier or something like that, show it on the drawing. Areas of high fire risk, so commercial kitchens, any transformer or boiler rooms, they should all be highlighted. And then services. So I'm not looking for every kind of cable tray or every cable or anything like that throughout the building. What we're looking for is maybe like if there's any large ductwork going through walls or something like that, that's what we want to see shown on the plans. Location of firefighting features then as well is probably one of the last things we'll be looking for as well. So where's your fire alarm panel? Have you got repeater panels? Where are they going? Any maybe firefighting shafts, so stairs, lifts, things like that. Any smoke ventilation systems, whether they be active or passive, so they should be highlighted on the plans. Riser outlets, riser inlets, all these kind of items that would allow us to assess the B5 aspect of the application. And then any other pertinent information that will relate to that building. So we can't kind of give you a detailed list of everything that needs to be there, because every building is going to be different and it's going to be a case by case basis. So if you're not sure, again, talk to the local fire officer, talk to the local building control authority. With regards to elevations, we should have grid lines and references. They should match the plans, because oftentimes we get submitted elevations and they don't match the plans in terms of window locations or something like that. We should see all the openings on the elevations. We should have the fire resistant lines and any compartment lines identified on the elevations. And then with regards to your external fire spread calculations within the report, you should be kind of highlighting where you're taking your enclosing rectangle if you're using the BR187 method of space separation. So finally, with regards to sections, then again, grid lines for reference if applicable. fire resistant lines, compartment lines, cavity barriers, any fire stopping. So give us adequate detail, especially around junctions and things like that as well. So very, very important areas. So just to note there as well, so if the application relates to an extension or a material alteration, distinguish them on the plan and on the elevations. So hatch them in a different color or something like that, just to highlight it to ourselves what exactly is existing and what's proposed. Especially with extensions and material alterations, we will often ask for the existing layout plans of the building as well, just to give us a good overview as to how it's going to change the performance of the building. Every drawing should have a unique reference number, and the current revision should be on all drawings. I just advise a bit of caution with regards to using legends and keys. So they're very, very important, but just make sure that you check them before submission. There's been often a time where I might get, there might be a key provided or a legend on the drawing that will actually contradict the report, the compliance report that's been submitted. So let's say on the drawing, on the key on the drawing, it might say that the fire detection alarm system will be designed, installed, and commissioned in accordance with IS 3218/2009 standard. Okay. Whereas in the report, you might actually be referencing the more up-to-date standard from 2013 and the amendment from 2019. So straight away, we have a contradiction. Which one is it being designed to? So just I advise a bit of caution with regards to legends and keys and make sure they're checked and updated regularly. So the final thing that will accompany the application will be your compliance report. And we'll just talk about a little bit of detail with regards to the compliance report. So the compliance report should address all the parts of part B of the second schedule to the building regulations. So that's B1 to B5. So our means of escape, internal fire spread linings, internal fire spread structure, external fire spread, and access and facilities for the fire service. Okay. So the report should clearly detail any works and guidance documents used for compliance. Okay. So you know yourselves, but part B of the second schedule to the building regulations, like these regulations are kind of, they're performance based, they're non-prescriptive. So compliance needs to be kind of based on either maybe technical guidance document B, which will prove prima facie compliance, or another recognized and appropriate alternative guidance. So the likes of BS 5588 suite or BS 9999. Okay, or if we're going down a fire safety engineer design, so maybe something to BS 7974. In any case, your design and the application will always be assessed back to B1 to B5 regulations. That's what we're assessing it to. It's your job to prove to us that you are in compliance with those regulations through whichever medium you deem necessary. So just with regards to maybe the use of BS 9999, like that's a holistic approach to fire safety within a building. So if you're using BS 9999, don't be surprised if the fire officer comes back to you and kind of says, right, that's fine, but can you please confirm to me that the owner of the building, or can we get something in writing from the owner of the building to say that the building will be managed in accordance with BS 9999. So if we're designing it to BS 9999, it should also be managed in accordance with it. We can't take a kind of pick and mix approach with that standard. Okay. So another important point to note then as well is the compliance report should specify how the works will comply with B1 to B5 and not just merely stating that they will comply. Okay, we want detailed explanations as to how you're going to comply with part B of the second schedule to the building regulations. Now, with regards to our compliance report, I just want to briefly talk for a minute about performance specification versus the actual materials of construction that are going to be in it. So when we're talking about performance specification, I'm referring to the likes of table A1 and A2 of technical guidance document B, and even section B2 there with regards to surface spread of flame classification. So you'll have your load bearing capacity, integrity, insulation, and surface spread of flame performance specs. Okay, whereas your actual material construction could be a blockwork wall. Okay, so if a particular material is kind of specified in the fire safety certificate or the revised fire safety certificate or the Reg Cert, and that material isn't actually used, or it's changed, or it's value engineered during the construction process, the fire cert might actually now be voided as a result. So very, very important to keep an eye on that kind of thing with regards to specifying the actual materials of construction. So as I said, if we had the performance spec there, like the protected corridor will be enclosed in construction, achieving 30 minutes fire resistance, integrity, and insulation in accordance with the relevant standard. Whereas the actual material of construction, if you're going to specify the protected corridor, will be enclosed with concrete block walls, achieving 30 minutes fire resistance, integrity, and insulation in accordance with the relevant standard. You see there with the second one, that protected corridor now has to be built with a concrete block wall. any changes to that is an issue. So you've essentially tied the builder into using that, and especially these days with regards to supply issues and that materials are being value engineered on site. Things are changing, so it's just a word of caution on that. Okay, so now if you are going down the route of just using the performance specification and just telling me that the enclosure will be 30 minutes fire resistance as opposed to telling me what the material is, there's probably a bit of word of caution with that as well. So like obviously for a regularization certificate, a performance specification is not going to be adequate. The thing has been built, it's there, so you should be able to tell me exactly what the material used was and have any kind of certification for it as well. Similarly, I would kind of argue maybe for a 7-day notice, that at that stage we should definitely know what we're building the project with. So again, we should have probably actual materials of construction there. But again, have a chat with the fire officer or the building control authority. They'll advise you as to which way to go. We may ask for further information on certain works, especially with regards to actual materials. So let's say maybe it's a prefabricated structure or something like that, or it's maybe a fire safety engineered solution. We may ask for certain information. Maybe it might be agreement certificates on certain products used or something like that to show, like, we want to grab it, we want to shake it, see what happens, and we want to be proven that the proposed build method will comply with our Part B of the building regulations. So in any case, if you're not sure, talk to the fire officer in question or talk to the building control authority, and they'll best advise you. Now, on top of our drawings and compliance reports in the application form, there is an additional declaration or certificate required for the regularization certificate, which is called the Statutory Declaration. So the Statutory Declaration should be from the applicant or the owner of the works in question. It's available to download pretty much off every Building Control Authority's website, or it's now also available on the BCMS now. Come the 1st of July, it can be automatically downloaded under the statutory documents there under any application. So very, very important to realize and to guide an applicant with regards to what they're actually signing off on here, because I don't think a lot of people realize what they're signing. Like it's essentially declaring that they'll agree to allow us to inspect the works. It's declaring that any conditions will be complied with. It's accepting that any conditions we have put on will be complied with within a period of 4 months. Now, very, very important on the bottom of that, and I appreciate it's probably small to see. I've it blown up on a further slide. There's a warning at the bottom of every statutory declaration, and it essentially says that it's an offence for persons to knowingly or recklessly make a statutory declaration that is false or misleading in a material respect. So if you sign a statutory declaration, or if the owner signs a statutory declaration and they knowingly or recklessly make misleading kind of information, legal proceedings could be initiated against you for that. Okay, so the excuse of "I didn't understand" doesn't really wash. Now, just to briefly run through fees for fire safety certificates and revised fire safety certificates. So again, final kind of item to be to accompany any application. So for a fire safety certificate, if you refer to the 5th schedule of the building control regulations, it outlines the fees required for every type of certificate application. So for a fire cert, if we've got the construction or extension of a new building, it's €125, or it's €2.90 per metre squared of floor area, whichever is the greater. Similarly, for material alteration and material change of use, if we're just changing the cladding on the external of the building and we're just affecting the external surfaces of a building, it's €125 application. So previously I'd mentioned there that single-story agricultural buildings are exempt, but let's say it's a 2-story agricultural building or a multi-story agricultural building, then the fee required for a fire safety certificate or revised fire safety certificate is €65 or 80 cents per metre squared of floor area. Again, whichever is the greater. The maximum fee for a fire safety certificate or a revised fire safety certificate is €12,500. Now, Reg Certs. So regularization certificates, given their nature, are actually 4 times the fee of your standard fire safety certificate or your revised fire safety certificate. So in that case, then now we're up to €500 for the construction, extension, material alteration, or material change of use. So either €500 or €11.60 per metre squared, whichever is greater. Again, if we're affecting the cladding or the external surfaces of a building, it's €500. If it's an agricultural building, 2 stories or multi-story, it's €260 or €3.20 per metre squared. And then the maximum fee for a regularization certificate is €50,000. There are certain exemptions. So similar to the planning regulations, there are certain exemptions for fees under the building control regulations, which is a separate set of legislation. So if we refer to Part 5 of the building control regulations, and in particular Article 22 of the building control regulations, if the application is being made by or on behalf of a voluntary organisation or an approved housing body, then they're deemed to be exempt from fees. Now, with regards to a voluntary organisation, okay, the use of the building essentially has to be for social, recreation, educational, or religious purposes. Maybe it's a hostel or a workshop or accommodation for disabled, poor, or homeless persons, and it is not to be used for profit or gain. So, like if a fee exemption is claimed, it should be kind of Article 22 of the building control regulations should be quoted in the application form for the fire cert or revised fire cert or regularization certificate. Okay. The building control authority or the fire officer in question, we may request further information on the organisation to ascertain whether it is voluntary or not. And just quoting the charity reference number on the application form is not sufficient to demonstrate voluntary status. Okay, so we might probe it a little bit. Now, moving on to the assessment process. So under Articles 13 for fire safety certificates, 20B for revised fire safety certificates, and 20C of the building control, or 20C for regularization certificates of the building control regulations, the building control authority will assess the validity of an application against those. So like we're ensuring that the items that I previously outlined, like the application form, drawings, the compliance report, the fee, that they're all submitted and they're all correct. If that is the case, we will validate the application and we'll move on to the assessment of it in terms of compliance with Part B of the regulations. So under Article 15 of the building control regulations, it's important to note that like we are restricted to assessing Part B of the second schedule of the building regulations only. So it's fire safety. Part B, fire safety, is the only thing that will be assessed through the drawings and the documentation that you've submitted. Part M is assessed under a different application, your disability access certificates, and all the other regulations. Nothing else is assessed other than Part B. And we will take due regard to any kind of dispensations or relaxations that have been previously granted or that are in the process. So from the point of submission of a fire safety certificate or a RFSC or a Reg Cert, we will have 2 months to assess the application and make a decision on it. Now, time extensions may be requested, so that'll just give you extra time just to come back with any further information that we might request from the consultant. Now, as I said, during the assessment process, the Building Control Authority will assess your application against Regulation B1 to B5 of the second schedule to the building regulations. Further information or revised information may be requested, depending on the level of information we've received initially. With regards to the assessment of regularization certificates, there's also an inspection that will be carried out by the Building Control Authority. And it's important just to note Article 20C6B of the Building Control Regulations. An authorised person shall be entitled to enter any land and inspect any building relating to the application. Okay, so we're authorised under the Building Control regulations to carry out the inspection. So there we go. There are the regulations there now, B1 to B5. I won't read down through all of them, but as I said, they're performance-based regulations. They're non-prescriptive. So as a result, we rely on fire safety standards and guidance documents to kind of demonstrate compliance with these regulations. But at the end of the day, the Building Control Authority are assessing the application against these regulations alone. That's it. Now, the granting and the process that follows on from that. So the Building Control Authority, we may grant a certificate with or without the conditions. And I just want to highlight the following wording because there kind of tends to be a bit of a misconception out there with regards to what a fire safety certificate actually is. Okay, so people kind of tend to think and rely very heavily on a building having a fire safety certificate. At the end of the day, and it's highlighted there in yellow, a Building Control Authority is certifying the design of the building. Okay, if the actual building itself wasn't built in accordance with the fire safety certificate, then any kind of sort of certification that we're given is null and void, essentially. Okay, so the relevant Building Control Authority hereby certify that the works or the building to which the application relates will, if constructed in accordance with the plans, calculations, specifications, and particulars submitted comply with the requirements of Part B of the second schedule to the Building Regulations 1997 as amended. Okay, but as I said, very, very important to note that we are only certifying the design of the building. So that is the form for a fire safety certificate that's set out in the fourth schedule. So if you go to the fourth schedule of the building control regulations, you'll see what a fire safety certificate format should look like, or a revised fire safety certificate or a regularization certificate. Okay, they'll follow that format. And as I said there, the building control authority hereby certify the works or the building to which the application relates will, if constructed in accordance with the plans, calculations, specifications, and particulars submitted, comply with the requirements of Part B. Okay, so you probably note that majority of the fire safety certificates that are granted will have might be on headed paper or something like that, kind of displaying the relevant building control authority's logo. Now, conditions. So where conditions are applied to a granted fire, or to apply to the grant of a certificate, okay, with regards to the fire safety certificate or the revised fire safety certificate, the building control authority might look for confirmation of compliance with the conditions at the compliance and completion stage. So if you refer to Article 20A and also even Section 8.2 of that little booklet there at the bottom right, the Code of Practice for Inspecting and Certifying Works, that will state that the building control authority have to ensure they're happy with any conditions that have been complied with the fire safety certificate or the revised fire safety certificate. So typically that'll look like an email or a letter from the building control authority to the assigned certifier requesting confirmation in writing that all conditions have been complied with. Now, with regards to regularization certificates, compliance with the conditions should be done within 4 months. Otherwise, the certificate is null and void. And when the owner or the applicant signs the statutory declaration, they are acknowledging that point there. Okay. So just on the left hand side there, I've just put down maybe some standard conditions that you might see on fire safety certificates. So inner rooms should be in accordance with section 1.2.3.1 of Technical Guidance Document B. So what you'll see with the majority of conditions is they'll always relate back to the standard that the compliance report was set out in, or that the building is being assessed against. So if it's BS 9999, then it'll most likely be sections of that will be referenced in the conditions as opposed to Technical Guidance Document B. Now, the refusal and appeals process. So the building control authority may refuse an application. The applicant will be notified. With regards to regularization certificates, if they're refused, I would be very surprised if the building control authority did not follow up with some sort of enforcement afterwards as to why they had to refuse the regularization certificate. If the application is refused, or if conditions are put on the application, the applicant can appeal to On Board Penala. So under Part 6 of the Building Control Regulations, it stipulates how the format of an appeal and how it how it's dealt with. So appeals to On Board Penala should be done within 1 month of the decision. Okay, they need to be made in writing. The name and address of the appellant should be on it, the subject matter of the appeal, the full grounds for the appeal, and then it should be accompanied by the relevant fee to On Board Penala. So last time I checked, I believe it's €500. Okay. Now, offences and penalties. So very quickly, I just want to talk about offences, but kind of before we delve into that, I just want to highlight the Article 12.2 and 20B1B of the Building Control Regulations. Okay, very, very important points here. So where a fire safety certificate or a revised fire safety certificate is required in respect of works or a building, a person shall not carry out such works or make a material change of use as regards such a building in the absence of a fire safety certificate or a revised fire safety certificate, or in contravention of any conditions. Okay, so if a fire cert or revised fire cert is required, the works shall not be carried out. And if conditions are put on a granted fire safety certificate or a revised fire safety certificate, if they're contravened, then it's considered an offence. Okay. So section 11.5, the powers of inspection by authorised persons. So section 11.5 of the Building Control Act now we're talking about. So any person who willfully or recklessly gives either to an authorised person or to a building control authority information which is false or misleading in a material respect shall be guilty of an offence. So it goes back to what I was saying about statutory declarations, but anything that's submitted to us, or if we're lied to, or if the information is false or misleading, the person will be guilty of an offence. Okay. Section 16 of the Building Control Act 1990 as amended Any person who contravenes by act or omission any requirement of this act or of any order, regulation, or notice under this act shall be guilty of an offence. So you see there I've underlined requirement of this act and regulation. So requirement of the act is obviously the certificates, like the fire safety certificate, revised fire safety certificate, regularization certificate, and the regulation then that we could be referring to there is either the building regulations or the building control regulations, both of which are under the umbrella of the Building Control Act. Now, Article 6A of the Building Control Regulations, so failure to comply with any requirements of parts 2, 3, 3A, 3B, or 3C shall be an offence to which Section 17.2 of the Act of 1990 applies. So just to note there, Part 3 refers to fire safety certificates, and Part 3A refers to revised fire safety certificates, regularization certificates, and statutory declarations. So that's what I was saying there. I blew it up there, just that warning at the bottom of a statutory declaration. It is an offence for a person to knowingly or recklessly make a statutory declaration that is false or misleading in a material respect. Now, penalties. So Section 17.1 of the Building Control Act defines penalties with regards to any offences that are committed. So a person guilty of an offence under the Building Control Act is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding €5,000, imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or to both the fine and imprisonment at the discretion of the court. If the offence is continued after conviction, the person is then deemed to be guilty of further offences and is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding €500 for each day of the offence after the initial conviction. Section 17.2 of the Building Control Act 1990 to 2014. So a person guilty of an offence by contravention of Section 3.5 or 8.6. So 3.5 relates to building regulations. 8.6 refers to enforcement notices. So with regards to building regulations, obviously Part B falls under the building regulations. So if you're guilty of an offence by contravention of Part B, you will be liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding €5,000, imprisonment not exceeding 6 months, or to both the fine and imprisonment. If the offence again is continued, you will be deemed guilty of a further offence, and you'll be liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding €500 for each day afterwards. Now, with this, again, if you're liable on conviction on indictment, you will be liable to a fine not exceeding €50,000, or imprisonment not exceeding 2 years, or to both the fine and the imprisonment. And finally, Section 17A of the Building Control Act 1990 to 2014. So if a fine is imposed by the court, the Building Control Authority can apply for the fine to be paid over to the authority. And then with Section 17B of the Building Control Act 1990 to 2014, on conviction, a person can also be ordered to pay the Building Control Authority's costs and expenses in initiating the legal proceedings in the first place. So important to be aware of that. So thank you for your time. That was a very quick whistle-stop tour of the fire safety certificate process, and I will open it up to any questions there now and just hand it back to you there, Sabrina.
Thanks, Martin. I see there is some questions in the chat, so we will get back to those questions. We don't have time today. We're now up at 1:15, that's 45 minutes. So we will circulate the questions and the answers. We'll get Martin to provide a response to those. I'm just going to share my screen then finally. So thanks, Martin. Thanks for that. That was a very useful overview of the FSC process. Found that very informative. We do have another event coming up, and we have further events in the next few months. So the next event is July 29th, and Pat Nestor on the importance of compliance and the role of the Building Control Authority. So everything is circulated via Eventbrite, and recordings available on the NBCO YouTube channel. So if you sign up to both Eventbrite and the YouTube channel, you'll get notifications when videos are released and when there's events coming up. So please sign up to both Eventbrite and YouTube. Thanks to the team here for organising the webinar, especially Shirley, and thanks to Martin for his time today. And thanks everyone who attended for your time and attention. I know we're all sick of Zoom at this stage, but it's still the way to go in the current circumstances. So thanks all, and look forward to see you on July 29th.